All right, good morning, ladies and gentlemen. I'm Chris Miller. I'm the Director of Marketing for Alibi Security. I want to welcome you guys and gals to the latest edition of our live webinar series. Today is Tuesday, June the 2nd, and we have a very special session today. We are going to host a solution showcase with our partners at D-Link. As everyone on the session probably knows, our goal is to provide comprehensive video surveillance solutions for you guys. As our dealer partners, we want to make sure you guys have access to the latest, greatest video gear, cameras, recorders, all the accessories that go along with that. But part of being a complete solutions provider for you guys is making sure that we are partnering with the right people in the industry so you guys have end-to-end solutions to deliver to your customers. And that's one of the reasons that we have our partner D-Link on today. As most of you guys know, they're one of the leaders in networking and connectivity solutions. You know, you've got networking and IT professionals worldwide who trust D-Link with their network infrastructure and connectivity. And today is going to be a great session to take a deeper dive into networking with a specific purview on the video surveillance side of things. If you guys were in attendance on our session about 3 weeks ago, we did kind of a light touch networking 101 with our sales team. It was a great introduction into all the topics and things that you need to be aware of and consider as you're building a video surveillance network. Well, today we're going to take the next step with our partners at D-Link. And I'm going to learn a lot on this session. You know, I'm just a dumb marketing guy, right? So this is going to be very insightful and helpful for me to get a better understanding on who D-Link is, and also hear from their technical team on some of the main considerations as you guys are going out and bidding and quoting jobs and building solutions for your customers. So today we've got two very special guests. We've got Chris Perez, who's our account manager, and then Mike Friends, who's the systems engineer. We're super excited to have these guys on board. And as one of our normal housekeeping items, along the way, we've got a lot of information we're going to cover, but along the way, if you guys have questions, use the Q&A feature down at the bottom of Zoom, right? There's a Q&A box down there. Type in your questions. More than likely, we're going to get to those questions during the session. Like I said, Mike and Chris are going to cover a lot of ground today from a network design and management perspective. But if there's questions that we don't hit, we'll address those at the end. And then anything we don't get to, we'll follow up with you guys directly to make sure we've got all your questions answered. Okay. So without further ado, I'm going to stop sharing my screen. We'll hand this over to the D-Link team. And we just are super excited to have you guys with us today, and look forward to hearing from you guys right now. Welcome, Chris. Welcome, Mike.
Hey, good morning, everyone. Give me 1 second here. All right, perfect. So I'm Chris Perez. I'm the account manager, actually based in Round Rock, Texas, just north of Austin. And we also have Michael Friends. He's our HQ system engineer. So happy to be here, happy to be speaking to all of you. So quick little overview. What we're going to be doing is kind of reviewing the typical surveillance network, the management behind it, and kind of best practices on what you should be implementing when you initially install and configure the switch. You know, we see very often that the switch gets overlooked initially on the initial configuration. A lot of times maybe the web UI or the CLI is a little overwhelming for individuals to configure. So what we wanted to do is talk about some of the features that should be enabled or even disabled to make sure that the switch actually works for you. There's nothing better than knowing that there was a problem. We live in a life that there is problems, but it's best when problems get resolved and you learn after the fact by an email or a text like, oh, something got resolved. So what I wanted to talk about briefly before I hand it over to Mike for the technical sales presentation portion of it is who D-Link is, right? So our company snapshot, we've been in business over 30 years, 780 million port shipped, Ethernet port shipments. We're in 190 different sales offices, and I believe we're in more countries now. We do have engineering and support locally in areas. So one of the verticals that we're very good at is casinos, schools, hospitality, retail, and businesses in between. So our end-to-end product portfolio is basically switching, security, and Wi-Fi. So what we'll be focusing on today is smart switches, and primarily that is a very good solution to actually for camera networks under 100 cameras, even 8, 16, 24, 48 IP cameras. That is the go-to switch, because you're not really needing the higher advanced features on, let's say, a layer 3 switch, but smart switches carry VLANs, QoS, various features that can have you run a surveillance network efficiently. And then we also do wireless as well, or Nucleus Cloud Wi-Fi and Nucleus Connect Wi-Fi. But for today, we're going to be focusing on switching, right? So just a quick overview. I wanted to throw this slide here where we fall against our competition, right? This is for Ethernet switch port shipments, right? So this is per Gartner marketing data. Enterprise Ethernet ports, Ethernet switches, D-Link is at 13%. So whereas Cisco is 26, Huawei 20, and then others, there's various others in this category thrown in here. D-Link is at 13%. So, and what helps us is that D-Link does anywhere from 5 port count all the way up to 48 port. And now we've even introduced switches that do 10 gig, 25 gig, 40 gig, and up to 100 gig on the higher end aspect. But for today, we'll be talking more web smart switching. And I wanted to show just a brief set of customers that actually use our equipment now, our national food chain. So McDonald's is a large purchaser of our switching equipment. Dollar General, they purchase a variety of our switches for their connectivity within the stores. Wingstop, a favorite place of mine that I like to go to. Dunkin' Donuts, which in my opinion is better than Starbucks, and then Chick-fil-A. They use our switching web smart switches and managed switches to connect the majority of their stores. And then some of the larger commercial enterprise, Applied Materials, MGM Grand Properties is a large purchaser of our switching equipment in an environment where the camera cannot go down. And there's Nevada Gaming Commission where certain things must be operating at all times, especially a camera. Also Wayne fueling. If you're ever at a fuel pump and you notice that the fuel handle says Wayne fueling, 9 times out of 10, there will be a D-Link switch somewhere connecting the transactions of the electric payments, right? So, and here's some of just local ones that I've personally done, Texas K-12, local government, Caldwell County, Joaquin, Livingston, Poteet. I really feel that D-Link is a really good play for the education space. You get a lot of technology for the money that you're putting in there. And in hospitality, healthcare, GE Healthcare is a large purchaser of our equipment, unmanaged switches as well as managed switches. Uvalde Memorial Hospital, to name a few, North State Texas Hospital, Millville Hospital. All these entities primarily use our switches for their surveillance network. Right? And here's a high-level overview of what D-Link can do. So we do scale out pretty well, starting from the bottom unmanaged switch series all the way up to our fully managed line. For today, we'll be talking more about the Web Smart Easy Smart Switch series, which is a perfect switch for its feature set for 8 cameras, 16 cameras, 24 cameras, and sub 100 cameras. And then one key thing I wanted to talk about is lifetime warranty. So there are some manufacturers that do 90-day warranty, 1-year warranty. We do actually a lifetime warranty on our products, and some of our unmanaged switches, just the plug and play switches, actually do a limited lifetime warranty, right? So some of our competition does do lifetime, not everyone. Some of them have even scaled back and done 5-year warranties, but we actually do, or 3-year warranties, but we continue to provide a lifetime warranty with next business day advanced replacement. That's a huge feature. I would seriously scrutinize a switch that's a 1-year or 90-day warranty.
And Chris, this is Chris. I'm just going to jump in.
Sure.
As our product managers look at partners and the gear that we supply outside of Alibi branded gear, right? Our main focus is making sure our dealer partners are supported properly. That's why, like D-Link, on Alibi gear, we offer an advanced replacement policy, right? Our goal is to make sure that we're delivering top quality, reliable gear. And that's one of the reasons that our PMs decided that we would partner with D-Link, because of that lifetime warranty, the commitment to reliable, predictable operational excellence. So it's something that I don't think a lot of people know about. So I think it's really important that people understand when they're buying a D-Link switch, they're getting a commitment to performance that's long lasting.
Right. So just to give you an example, there was a Poteet ISD Independent School District just south of San Antonio here. We just processed an RMA replacement for a switch that was lifetime, that was purchased like in 2007. So we do honor the warranty. As long as you're the original purchaser of the equipment, we'll take care of you. Right. So here's the agenda before I hand it off to Mike Friends and do the technical overview. Again, POE review of what to look for when you're initially building out a surveillance network. What does that look like? Key things to look out for. Setting up a workstation to configure, log in the switch. Best practices on initial setup. Things that are constantly overlooked and things that you should probably consider doing on your next deployment on the D-Link switch for any surveillance network. And then features like test cable and PD Alive that are very good troubleshooting features if you're on site and you can't figure out why a camera is dying on you, or why a PoE AP or PoE phone or something like that that's connected to the switch. There's some good diagnostic built into the switch. There's a good intelligence in the switch that can actually help you figure out what's going on. And then QoS, why would you set that up? The initial configuration for a surveillance network, why you would go about doing that. And then VLAN concepts. This is something that some surveillance installers just completely ignore. It's always good to segment your traffic where certain ports can view certain ports. Now, granted, a surveillance network is when it's usually done at a business, it's on a completely separate switch network, right? A lot of times, though, you want to lock down that switch where your customer or your end user that you're installing this equipment can't add stuff or can't plug in cables or disrupt your network that you installed, and then you're responsible for that. And guess what? When they call you, it's your fault. They're not going to tell you exactly what they did over the weekend when they were trying to add a couple more ports to their network, and they found that your surveillance network had a couple additional ports or something like that. You get blamed, and here there's actions where you can enable and lock down certain things where they can't add to your switch network, your surveillance network that you're deploying. And then support, what does that look like? So PoE classification really quick. So there's many of you know this. There's 3 PoE classifications: 802.3af, AT, and BT. BT being the newer standard or higher power output. AT is primarily in AF, was primarily what most IP surveillance cameras still stand. Maybe some of the outdoor cameras or cameras that have require a lot of power definitely will use BT. And here's pretty much to break out the classifications. This is listed here because sometimes what you can do in the switch, if the camera is not being powered properly, or you were given the camera, or you don't really know the PoE classification, 9 times out of 10, 99 times out of 100, the switch automatically does it for you. But there's times where it doesn't communicate properly, where you can actually set the PoE classification manually in the switch to help troubleshoot why a certain camera is not working right. So with that, I'm going to stop sharing my screen here, and I'm going to leave it to Michael Friends, who will start doing the technical sales training there. So Mike.
Thank you, Chris, and thank you, Chris. I'm Mike Friends. I'm the field engineer. Usually I'm on the road a lot, and I'm looking forward to getting back on the road. In fact, I'm looking forward to everyone getting back on the road or back in the office. So I want to go cover a lot of ground today, and I want to make sure you guys can see my screen right now. You should see the POE classification.
Yeah, we got you, Mike. Looks
All
good.
right, all right. So this is where Chris left off. So let's jump right to it. So part of my goal is not to have you know all the ins and outs by the time I'm done. I just want you to have a better idea of why the switch is important and how it can save you time if you do a little bit of homework beforehand. So by the time you get to the customer and start plugging in the Alibi cameras or your access points or whatever you're plugging into the switch, you'll have a good idea on if it should work, and you'll be able to tell your customer this will work versus it should work. So we have an example right here. Chris just talked about the class. So the data sheet with any PoE, Power over Ethernet device, also called a PD, a powered device, the thing at the end of the cable, any PD is going to have a data sheet. So here's an example here. So we just looked up the numbers here. So it gives us all the information we need to make sure it's going to work with the switch. So the first camera, which happens to be the hungriest, it tells you it uses 18 watts, which is a pretty good amount. So you know that's going to be a higher class. And it tells you it's class 4, and it follows the standard. So that's what you look for. If it follows the standard, if it tells you the class, then you know it will work with a switch that follows the standard and tells you the class. And D-Link switches, we're standards-based. We follow the standards, and as long as you know that the port you're plugging into has been configured for enough wattage, it will work. It's not a should, it will work. And we've had a lot of experience with that. So the first one needs 18 watts, no problem. The second camera is not as hungry, so it uses 7 watts. And that's what I see in the industry a lot, around 7 to 10 watts. And the third camera is 7.5 watts, which is no problem at all. What I'm seeing more, however, is for the larger PTZ cameras. And what is emerging right now, you guys can probably take a guess, are the infrared or the temperature sensing cameras. Those are very hungry. Those are very hungry. They're going to use a lot of wattage, and it may need a higher class. So with this example, it's very straightforward how to spec the system beforehand. All you do is just add up the wattage, add up the actual wattage that the devices need, and that total, the total here at the bottom, the 804 watts, is what's called your PoE budget. So all you need to do is pick a switch where the switch's PoE budget exceeds the budget that you need. For this example, we're using the 1100, the D-Link DGS-1100-10 MPP switch, and you see that this particular switch just blows the budget out the water. It's a 242 watt switch. It has 8 gig PoE ports. And what's special about this switch, port 7 and port 8 follow the latest standard, which is the 802.3 BT. In fact, let me back up real quick and show you this. So the newest standard is 802.3 BT. And it's amazing that that particular standard can go anywhere from 45 watts up to 90 watts. So if you do cameras, great, it'll do the PTZ cameras. But if you decide to do lighting, so it can handle a lot of the lighting now, the larger IR illuminators, those devices are very hungry for power. You could do that. If you guys do any access control, there's access control now that requires that much wattage. So a switch like this can help you win those jobs, and you could do the math beforehand so you could do the install, get in and get out. So a typical statement of work is that you have the IP surveillance, you have the data network, you're going to create VLANs, you're going to run the cable, which in my opinion is probably the hardest part, and configure the cameras. Configuring the cameras, that's a piece of cake for me once you have the cable run. So Now with D-Link switches, all of our managed switches have a default IP address. And our default IP address is 10.90.90.90. So to talk to our switch, and I'm actually show you that right now, to talk to our switch, you just put your workstation or laptop or notebook on the same network. You put the address in your favorite browser. So right now you should see the 10.90.90 here at the top. And for the majority of our switches, the default login is admin and the default password is ADMIN. You'll get the wizard. Most engineers or most experienced techs just skip the wizard. So I'll do that. I'll skip the wizard. And then you're at the managed interface. So keep in mind, that's the difference between a managed and an unmanaged switch. The managed switch, you're going to get some type of interface to tell the switch what to do. With an unmanaged interface, it's basically plug and play, but you can't really tell it what to do. You're not going to be able to turn a port on or off. You're not going to have the higher levels of security. It's unmanaged. Typically cheaper switches, but they're not as smart. So we successfully logged into the switch. We'll come back and actually show you some of the features later. So let's get back over here. So there's nice features that's built into a managed switch. So this is the 1110 MPP, as I mentioned, but in nearly all of our PoE managed switches, you'll have this ability to test the cable. So you could go into the switch, navigate, it's usually under OAM, and you pick the cable you want to test, and you click test cable. The trick, being an engineer, I could tell you the ins and outs really quickly. For short cables, like for 3 foot or lower, it's not effective. But if you have a longer cable run, 6 foot or longer, it's very effective. It's going to tell you if the link is up or down. It's going to tell you if it's a short in the cable, and you can test your cable straight away. Now, the other thing, and this is probably more compelling, it's going to let you know what your PoE ports are doing. So I actually want to switch back to the switch right now. And the switch is going to be under the system. You pick PoE, and I'll show you all of this. Under the PoE menu, you'll see that you can just get an overall view of the system. You can look at the status, and I use that quite a bit. The PoE configuration is very important. And we'll talk about the PDAlive configuration feature a little bit later. And the PDAlive is compelling because that's another feature that separates D-Link switching from our competitors. I think it's only one other competitor that has this feature, but it's a very nice feature. So if we click on the system, it's just going to give us an overview. So it tells us we have that 242 watt budget. I have a few things plugged in right now, not very many things, but it tells you that it is 10 watts are being delivered right now. I click on the status, it's going to give me a bit more detail. So you can look at this and you can tell straight away what ports are where power is being delivered. We talked about the class earlier. So you see this particular device reported to the switch and said, I'm a class 3 device, give me my power. So the maximum power wattage this particular device can get is 15.4, but it's only using 2.5. We usually get a lot of questions on that. Hey, if it's rated for a certain amount of wattage, does it reserve that wattage? So we can answer that question later. That's always a good question. So you can see from this summary where everything is. So let's go to the configuration. Now this part is important. This section here can help prevent you from doing a truck run. So if the customer calls you up, one of their PoE cameras is acting strange or is not acting right, you can easily go in here. If you know your camera is plugged into port 1. So I'm gonna go back to status real quick. So yeah, I have a camera plugged into port 1 and I want to reboot that camera. If you have set this up, if you have a port forwarding setup or a hole in the firewall set up, you could actually log on remotely or from anywhere that has internet access. You could pick the port. You could change the state to disabled, and you could click apply. And what that effectively does, it turns off the power to that device. So when I go back here to check the status, it should say it's disabled, which means the camera's turned off. So I could go back to the PoE configuration straight away and just enable it again. And that's effectively turns the camera back on. So you just rebooted the camera and fixed the problem, hopefully fixed the problem that easily without having to have a truck roll. So let's go back to the slides. Now, PD Alive is another compelling feature that I mentioned. So if you know the IP address of the PD power device, whether it's a camera, access point, or whatever, any POD device, it's very effective for cameras. All you do is navigate to the PD Alive functionality and you put in the information. So let's take a look at that really quick. So we're back here, and here's PD Alive. We'll go back to port 1. I'm having trouble with this camera all the time, so let's just keep an eye on it. So we tell it the port. We want to enable the PD Alive functionality. We put in the IP address of the device. And then we tell it, okay, how often do I want it to go through the pool? And how many times do I want to retry before taking an action? So I'll try it 3 times. And then how much time do I want to wait between actions? So I'll wait 60 seconds. And what do I want to do when the camera does not communicate, or whatever device does not communicate? You could either notify that admin, or you can reboot, or you could do both. Typically, you could say reboot it. That way, if you check the camera the next day, you can see that it's been rebooted, and it will show up in the logs. And then once you set these configurations, you just click apply, and that's it. Very, very straightforward. And all this feature really does, it just sends a ping, and if it doesn't get a ping response, it says, oh, something's going wrong. I'll reboot or take whatever action that the admin specifies. And that's PD Alive. Let's go back to the slides. So in most typical installations, let me just jump right ahead here. You're going to have the firewall coming in. Yes, D-Link sells firewalls, but we're standards-based. If you're using somebody else's firewall that you like, it will work fine with those guys also. You'll have a PoE switch. So the PoE switch is going to give you PoE power to whatever device. Another common question that we receive is, hey, if I have a PoE switch and I plug in a non-PoE device like a laptop for my host, does it send PoE power? That's the beauty of a PoE switch. It's smart enough to know not to send power to a non-PoE device. So you can plug in any device as long as it's a standard Ethernet device, and it's smart enough to know not to send power or to send power. So with any business switch, D-Link or whoever, you'll have most of these setups. But with D-Link, you'll have these and other capabilities as well. So with a lot of our switches, you get a paper clip, stick it in the reset hole, and you can reset the switch back to factory defaults. Very easy. So if you have a switch, what I usually suggest is when you have a new install, you're newly on site, even before you start the configuration, just do a reset. Upgrade the firmware, I suggest. Do a reset, then you know you're starting with the latest and greatest. So we already talked about how you actually get into the switch. 10.90.90.90. Put your workstation or your laptop on the same network, log into the switch, and away you go. Many times, the bad guys know what the default setting is for anybody out there. So the bad guys know that D-Link switches, the default IP is 10.90.90.90. So what I suggest a lot of time is change your IP straight away. So know your IP scheme. And then the second thing is add the password. So what Alibi does, I'm sure, and what D-Link learned to do is that we force customers to add a password and add a stronger password. So you need to do that for whatever your PD is and for the switch. And that's straightforward on how to do. So that being said, let's log back in and show you that really quick. So let's ADMIN. And this time I'm going to tell it to ignore the wizard next time. And we'll go under system, pardon me. We'll go under system information, IPv4 interface. That's the IP address. And this is where you can change the IP. You change it to the IP you need and then click apply. Remember, it's going to kick you off the system if you're in a different IP segment. You'll just have to reconfigure your workstation to log back into the switch once you change the IP address. Now, across the top here are a lot of your diagnostics and troubleshooting menu options. For example, if you want to save your config, this is very important. You've made a lot of changes, you changed the IP, you added whatever, added VLANs, you want to save your config. So that's where you do that. If you want to upgrade your firmware, which that's something I suggested, here's where you upgrade the firmware. Once you change a bunch of things and you have a lot of customers and maybe you offer managed services, you could save your customer's configuration and keep it in your log just in case the customer erases the config or has a power outage or something goes wrong. You could have their saved config and restore it if needed. And here's the wizard. Exit the wizard. And you can always get online help. Right. Let's go back to the slides. As I mentioned, absolutely change your password. Give it a strong password if possible. And we talked about how you can save your config. Absolutely save your config. And we've already talked about looking at your PoE and your PoE settings. Very important. So this part I could kind of go skip over because we've already went over a lot of this section. So let's talk about QoS. QoS is quality of service. And QoS is important because it's like being on the freeway and you decide who gets to get into the carpool lane. So many times, believe it or not, the most important thing in the carpool lane is the communications. So you usually give communications a higher priority. So if you guys do cameras or if you do VoIP phones or you do a combination of both, you usually would set the quality of service higher on the communication. So your VoIP phones would be set with a higher quality of service. And then next is probably the cameras. These days, you might give your cameras a higher priority. One thing that casinos do, that's what they do. They give their PTZ cameras, especially their choke point cameras, a higher priority when they set their QoS. Very straightforward to configure the QoS. You'll see this menu in the switch, and all you do is say, okay, I know my PTZ camera is plugged into port 8, so I'm going to give my PTZ camera attached to port 8 the 6 or the higher priority. I'll give it a 6 priority or 7 priority or whatever. If it's not as important, you may give it a 1 or 2 because it's a lower priority. And that's right in the interface of the managed switch. This is just an example of what you do. You pick the port, you set the priority. Very straightforward. All right, now VLANs I talk about all the time. VLANs, I love doing it in person. I love doing it hands-on, and I hope we get back to the days where we can do this hands-on, because many times our integrators and our partners have problems with VLANs, and it's best explained hands-on. But that being said, here's the egghead slide. So it talks about VLANs. What is a VLAN? It's just a virtual LAN. So basically what you could do is chop up a switch to make it multiple switches. So it does a couple of things. Increases your security, so certain ports can't talk to other ports. And it also decreased your what's called a broadcast domain. Broadcast means everything talks to everything, and many times you don't want that. So I'm not going to just read this slide. I'll just talk about if you have a large network. For example, I'll use the casinos again. Yes, they do use dynamic routing, and yes, they use VLANs. So if they have some cameras that keeps an eye on restaurants, and then they have other cameras that keeps an eye on the gaming tables, they'll have separate VLANs. And they may give the higher priority to the gaming tables and a lower priority to the restaurants or whatever. So all you do is give the VLAN basically a number called a VID. So the VID, you could give it whatever number you want, up to 4,096. Usually I don't see customers with more than 20 or 30 VLANs, but depending on how many hosts you have or how many devices, you may not need many VLANs, but that option is available to you. So this is a simple illustration. If you're talking switch to switch, you want to have tagged. What does that mean? Having a tagged VLAN means it carries all of the VLAN data from one switch, switch A, to the other switch, switch B. So they're aware of each other's VLAN. So different devices on different VLANs can or cannot communicate depending on how you set it up. But the important thing to remember, if you do have a larger network or even a medium-sized network and you want to communicate switch to switch, use the tagged VLAN ports. Tagged VLAN. And this is an example of the interface. So let's look at that really quick. Chris, how are we doing on time? Are we doing okay?
Yeah, we're in good shape.
Okay, great.
Yeah, for sure.
So let's show you the VLANs. Let's log back in, admin, ADMIN, admin. Now, any of you out there do any of the certifications or do a deeper dive into VLANs or study it, you'll know that VLANs are an L2 feature. So it's a layer 2 feature. So if you're looking at a D-Link switch or whoever switch, if you're trying to figure out how to configure their VLANs, you'll usually look under L2. So that's what we'll do. So we'll go under L2 features, and straight away we see VLANs. So we'll pick the VLAN. The standard to create your VLANs and tell the VLANs their VID, their number, is 802.1Q. So for any of the eggheads out there, you could Google 802.1Q and read all about it, but it's not as bad once you get started. So you see, I already have the default VLAN. You will always have a default VLAN. So it tells us the VLAN. Default VLAN ID is nearly always 1, and it tells you the ports that are in that VLAN. And I've got another VLAN here. I got a VLAN 2. So I've put my ports 9 and 10, my uplink ports, in a different VLAN. So let's create another VLAN. I just want to call this VLAN, let's say 100. I put in 100, hit apply. like that, I've created another VLAN. So what is that VLAN doing? It's not doing anything right now, but it's smart enough to know to put ports 9 and 10, my uplink ports, in this VLAN also. And these ports are tagged. And remember what we said, it's tagged because it believes it's going to talk to another switch. So if it's going from switch to switch, it's talking to it's going to be a tagged port. If I decide, okay, I want to separate some data, so I have a PTZ camera I want on the VLAN 100, I would need to go in and tell the switch, put port 8 in VLAN 100. So how do I do that? I go to the actual VLAN interface, and I can say, here's port 8, and then I can edit it and tell it to be in whatever VLAN I want. So remember, I created that VLAN ID 100. So right here, I can say, okay, be in 100. And I can say what VLAN is allowed. And what we do in the hands-on or the advanced trainings, we talk about all these terms. We talk about the hybrid, we talk about trunk, we talk about access, we talk about ingress checking, egress checking, we talk about the cloning and all. We won't do that today, but just suffice it to say, you have everything you need in your management interface to configure your VLAN. I'll go back to the slides. So we talked about this. We talked about setting the VLAN ID. 1 is usually your default, and every switch I've worked with, you always have 1 as the default. You have a ton of VLANs to choose from. I've done a lot of installs and helping customers. I've never seen more than like 100 VLANs. Big organizations probably have thousands, but you could have up to 44,096 typically. Another feature unique to D-Link is our surveillance VLAN. Really nice feature. I recommend that if you have experience with VLANs, some advanced text, just configure it yourself. But if you have less experience and you want the switch to do some things for you, then you can enable surveillance VLAN. It's a very nice feature, but it does some things for you. So the part where you need to be careful is to make sure you understand. If you say, okay, I want to turn on auto surveillance VLAN, it will put certain devices in that VLAN automatically. So if you cannot access those devices, you just have to realize, hey, it's in the different VLAN. So I just need to log on to that VLAN to configure those devices now. So here's an example of that. So if you decide to use a surveillance VLAN, same, you have to tell it the VLAN ID. You tell it what's called the OUI, or basically part of the MAC address of the device, and it's automatically going to put those devices in its on VLAN. So if you know you want to put all Alibi cameras separately, you would just put in the MAC address or the OUI, the first part of the MAC address, and it would do it for you automatically. But just to circle back on what I mentioned earlier, if you're familiar with VLANs, you could do it manually, accomplish the same task. All right. And then you could get a VLAN summary, and we're off and running. The last thing I want to emphasize is, and this is a big differentiator for D-Link also, you could go to our support site and get nearly every piece of information you need. You just go to support.dlink.com. Let me do that really quick. Let's see here. So if I go to support.dlink.com, that's going to be right up here. This is our support site. And what makes our support site different is you'll see here at the top, we have the consumer and the business. We sell both products. If you know the part number of the part or the product family, you can put that in to search for it. Once you pick a product, I'll just pick this 1100 switch right here. I'll click on the switch that I want to get information on. You pick the hardware revision, and then straight away, you're going to get everything. You're going to get the firmware level. So if you need to upgrade the firmware, you can. You're going to get the user manual. There are some competitors that actually make you log in to get this information. They make you log in to get firmware. They make you log in to get the user manuals or the data sheets. We do not. You just come here, get the information you need. You could read up on the product beforehand if you need to. And here's the other important thing that I mentioned. When you want to get the data sheet, here's the data sheet. That's where you can find out the PoE budget. If you're working with an access point or some other PD powered device or PoE device, you can find out the PoE class and the PoE budget, etc. And we do have utilities to help you discover devices and configure devices. So for example, for this switch, you could use the Smart Console utility to find the device and configure it. It's a little bit easier to configure the device if you use the utility, and then you'll get getting started guys. You'll get all that information. So Chris is going to talk a little bit about if you do need support, you can get the support also from D-Link. But if you want to try it yourself, just go to support.dlink.com.
Right.
All right.
Mike, yeah, thank you so much, Mike.
Thank you.
Yeah, just I'll make a quick note on just regarding the support side. There's so much, there's a good variety of information that is available to you. A lot of times, you know, when you're troubleshooting network or you already installed something and then you get called back to fix something, right? Sometimes you can fix that yourself by just updating the firmware. And sometimes there's a bug fix that we do, and we're pretty good on updating firmware on our switching products. But initially, when you're configuring your network and you're going about setting it up initially, I mean, the QoS, the VLAN configuration, the PD Alive feature, you definitely want to maybe make a configuration file out of that, have that stored for each one of your installs, so you have a reference point, something you can go back to. And before you install a switch, maybe you want to check to see if there's an updated firmware for that specific switch that maybe adds some feature enhancements or correct some issues or security holes that were addressed in that firmware. Highly, highly recommended. But yeah, just doing those things, following some of these best practices, creating that config file when you're done setting it up, taking that little extra time to get it done right the first time, so you make the switch kind of work for you. And then when you get calls, it should be something that's maybe out of the switch's control, like the power is out, ask your customer, is the switch plugged in or something like that. But if you've done everything you can from the initial set point on the installation, it makes your life easier and less callbacks, and you know, saves time and saves money. So Chris at Alibi Security, did you want to?
Yeah, guys, that was a great overview. I think the point of the session was really to get a really good foundational knowledge on the power and features and functionalities that are available in D-Link switches, right? And I know, Mike, man, you could have spent hours going into some of the details on some of those menu selections, right? I think the point here is that, you know, when you look at the smart switches that D-Link offers, they give you a lot of capabilities, a lot of intelligence built into those menu options, so you can set them up properly and then manage the network from there. So it was a really helpful overview, and I think, you know, with some of our dealer partners, there's going to be an appetite for an even deeper dive. We can talk about that later, but I think you guys did a really good job on covering a lot of the information. And, you know, one question that did pop up, Chris, I saw you answered it, but I want to kind of open this up to a broader question and answer, so our entire audience gets a little insight specific to the PD Alive feature. The question was, can you use PD Alive to monitor cameras at remote locations as well? For example, I have a salon owner with 35 locations. We have Alibi cameras installed at all of those, and we'd like to introduce some sort of ping program or another technology that will alert the owner. Can you do that with the PD Alive? So why don't you guys talk a little bit more about that, and, you know, if that kind of dovetails into other kind of functionality or features that kind of enable an easier maintenance or an easier alert program so you know when something's wrong with devices on the network. I think that'd be real informational for this audience.
So regarding to the PDLive, that goes back to initial settings that you should do when you do the initial install. So yeah, you can enable it. If the switch supports it, you can enable it. As long as you have internet access remotely from where you're at to that switch, you can enable that, and you can set those parameters, how many seconds you want to wait before you reboot the camera or the phone or the card reader or whatever. But Mike, did you want to touch on that a little bit more? Friends?
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. So as long as you can ping the device, you can do the notification. The trick is if it's a customer and they're remote, that device is going to need internet access, as Chris mentioned. So you'll be able to communicate via email or whatever to the administrator. So the answer is yes, as long as it would need some setup, but you can do that.
Right. Again, initially setting it up, it would have been great to enable that feature if you have that in that specific D-Link switch, but you could do it after the fact. And then like Mike mentioned in the overview, the live demo, that it does create a log. So the owner can log into the switch and view the logs of what was done, right? So pretty good feature, especially like, let's say in Texas when there's lightning storms and sometimes you come in Monday morning and stuff's not working right, stuff got rebooted. You know, I have a bunch of issues when I have lightning storms in my home where my TV and my cable box don't work and stuff needs to be rebooted. It's really nice if the switch, when you have it configured from the get-go, does that for you. Something else that we could talk about for another session is our cloud-based solutions, where Joseph, you had mentioned the PDLive feature. The cloud-based solutions that we have coming out that hopefully will be available through Alibi Security soon. You can deploy multiple switches at various locations, and you can view it all under a portal. And from there, you can view all the statistics. You can reboot a port remotely. You can monitor the network at 1,000 sites if you wanted to do that. And that's a completely different solution, but that's another solution that D-Link offers. So.
Yeah, and like you and I talked about, Chris, that may be a session in and of itself down the road. You know, once we onboard that product and get familiar with it ourselves, and it could be a really powerful new tool for our dealer partners if they're looking for cloud managed solutions.
Right. Right. And I see another question there from.
Yeah, Mr. D. He had a question about he needs really strong security in his home network. Can I use the D-Link firewall and connect to my home router?
Yeah, this is Mike. I can answer that. So, Mr. D, your answer is you need all of our switches, all of our routers. You need everything. No, just kidding. It's a well-kept secret. Our firewalls actually do quite well, but there's a lot of competition in the firewall market. But we have some fantastic firewalls. So we have anything from a lower end. It's called a DSR, Data Services Router, or D-Link Services Router. 150, DSR-150, all the way up to our DSR-1000 AC. And what's the difference? The difference is basically speeds and feeds. Typically for home, I start with the DSR-250 as our firewall router. Has a bunch of features. You control the firewall rules, you control the port forward, you control the WAN ports, whether you need 1 or 2 WAN ports, etc. down the line. We could talk about that offline, or you could send us an email, but I would start with the DSR-250 to answer your question, but then I would try to talk you into the DSR-1000 or something higher.
Yeah, thanks for that answer, Michael. That's awesome. So, you know, from homes all the way up to really complex businesses like casinos, you know, casinos, you mentioned those earlier, Krishna. They have very specific compliance standards that they need to manage against as they report into gaming commissions. So their cameras and their network needs to be up, you know, 99.9999999% of the time. So, you know, they're looking for reliability, performance, and that's why they turn to D-Link to make sure that they have the uptime that's required by those gaming commissions.
Mm-hmm.
You know, the last question was, can you get a copy of the slideshow? Yeah, we're going to take this recording from this webinar today. We'll have this uploaded onto the Alibi Security YouTube channel by the end of the day. If not by the end of the day, then first thing tomorrow morning. we have over 200 videos up there now. We've been really putting a lot of effort into providing educational, informational, product-related content for our dealer partners, because we're not available 24/7, right? We need to sleep sometimes, but our Alibi Security channel is always available, and we will get this up and made available for you guys as soon as humanly possible so you can review the information. And if you have any additional questions about D-Link switches, Alibi products, obviously reach out to our dedicated account managers. We're here to service you guys and gals. We want to make sure you get the right information on the right solutions for your customers. You know, as I mentioned at the beginning of this webinar, our goal is to provide you guys with comprehensive security solutions, so you can go out and win more jobs. You can compete more aggressively in the marketplace. You have complete solutions that you can deliver to your customers. Chris, Mike, any final closing comments before we shut this down?
Yeah, just thank you for the time, and I'm glad my kids didn't walk in on this webinar. That's awesome. But thank you so much. Again, we're here to help. Thank you for being a great partner, and we look forward to doing another one of these on the cloud security in the near future.
Yeah, you betcha.
Thank you so much.
Yeah, thanks, gentlemen. We will talk to you guys soon, and everybody out there who's attending, we appreciate your time this morning. We'll see you next time during our live webinar series. Thanks so much.
Bye, guys. Bye, everyone.
Bye-bye.